Hey, it's been a little while, eh? Link's Awakening, released in 1993 for the Game Boy, is a fan favorite, to say the least. You could say Link's Awakening helped push handheld gaming alongside Pokemon Red and Blue. It wasn't as influential or as powerful as Pokemon, but it certainly helped develop the new tech. It reminds me of the relationship between Super Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time, wherein Ocarina didn't pioneer 3D gaming, but it helped develop it. For all intents and purposes, it's a game with the breadth and scope of A Link to the Past crammed into a tiny, portable screen. For this video, I'll be focusing on the director's cut for the Game Boy Color, which as you'd expect had color. It comes with an entirely new dungeon and color printing capabilities that are hilariously useless nowadays. I mean, most people play the director's cut anyway because it didn't take anything away from the original. It's about as definitive as you could possibly get, a true director's cut, and as such I don't really feel like talking about it as in-depth as I have for the other Zelda remakes. What originally began as a port of A Link to the Past eventually transformed into an original project with almost no ties to the series' traditional motifs. No Hyrule, no Zelda, no Triforce. Instead, it would see Link stranded on Koholint Island and tasked with waking the Windfish by collecting 8 musical MacGuffins. Structurally, it bears resemblance to A Link to the Past, which is likely where its roots as a port shine most clearly. I suppose the twist this time is... well, I guess it's not even really a spoiler to say that the events of Link's Awakening take place within the Windfish's dream. You can sort of piece it together at the beginning. You fight nightmares, your task is to wake something up. The title of the game is Link's Awakening. The core conceit is to awake from a troubled slumber, but it raises some interesting questions about that journey. See, the past games in the series were fairly straightforward. There's an evil plaguing the land in the form of Ganon, and you've got to put an end to it. Sometimes there'll be an initial twist, like Aghanim pulling the strings in A Link to the Past, but eventually everything falls into place, you get the Triforce, and the deed is done. This time, because the events are largely disconnected from any overall mythos, the stakes are a lot more personal. As the game goes on, it becomes more evident that you're inside a dream, that everything around you is fake, and that completing your quest will mean the island's eradication. This wouldn't be a huge issue, you don't develop any particularly strong bonds with the townspeople, except for Marin. She saves you after you wash ashore, she tells you where to get your belongings, you listen to her song, you have a heart-to-heart at the beach, you save her right before the final dungeon, and throughout all these encounters, it's clear that she develops somewhat of a crush on Link. It's pretty adorable, and that's exactly what you don't want to feel towards a figment of your imagination. Imagine you have a really good dream. Perhaps life isn't the best at that moment, and you dream of something far better. Maybe you're rich, maybe you're famous, maybe you achieve your life goals, maybe you fall in love. Whatever the case, I think we can all resonate with that initial feeling of dread when we wake up and realize it was all a dream. That's the bittersweet sucker punch of Link's Awakening's story. Rather than looking forward to the final battle as the game progresses, you begin to dread it. That inevitable encounter that'll effectively kill every resident of Koholint. Though it is implied that Marin lives on as a seagull, I sort of prefer the regular ending where Link is forced to keep Koholint alive through his memories, a sentiment echoed hard by the manga adaptation. This one sees Link giving up halfway through his quest in an effort to keep Koholint from vanishing, only to realize that it's his destiny to wake the Windfish. The island would be ravaged by monsters on the daily unless Link finally put an end to it all. What he does, assumedly in both the game and the manga, is hope that Koholint can stay alive through his strong memories of it. It's a unique story setup, and that it lands squarely within the confines of A Link to the Past's structure is pretty amazing. Side note, this manga ain't half bad. It contextualizes some of the game's events rather well and is incredibly faithful to the events of said game. It allows more time for Link to forge bonds with Marin and Terran, which makes that ending even more heartbreaking. I love this story, damn. Breath of the Wild, eat your heart out. Structurally, it's not much different from the 3D titles. Find dungeons, raid them, take the new item, fight a boss, and collect the MacGuffin. Rinse, repeat. Koholint, however, is a little different from overworlds of series past and present. Hyrule in previous games was large and expansive, especially in A Link to the Past. Not only was the base map large, there was an entire dark world to explore that had unique dungeons, items, and side quests. Koholint is comparatively small. The base map is all there is to see and do, and though it is indeed smaller in size, I'd argue that's to its benefit. If you recall, one of my biggest problems with Ocarina of Time was that, at some points, progression could be incredibly confusing. Most of the comment responses I received stated that I should have been talking to the NPCs and reading their hints. Ignoring the fact that the game doesn't really do much to incentivize that, Hyrule was so large with so many people and so much space that talking to absolutely everyone during every point of story significance just isn't feasible. When you have to travel back to Kokiri Forest for Saria's song to cheer up Darunia, there aren't many hints available that would lead you to that conclusion. Also, I know you can use the stick to light the fire to break the bomb for the shortcut. I know now, so stop telling me. Same with Jabu Jabu, but since in that case there's a threadbare hint dropped by an NPC, many people make it seem like it's a totally okay puzzle to solve. Except, funny thing, that hint is actually pretty blatant. The Zora states, according to the legend of Zora, the act of offering a fish to Lord Jabu Jabu will make you happy. Honestly, it doesn't get more blatant than that, and what's cool about this is that it's contained within Zora's domain. When my comments put me on blast for not talking to everyone when I entered a new area, well, I actually now believe they were right. I was being really impatient when I first played Ocarina of Time. Looking back, I think it's actually more infuriating that it's so clear where you have to go and what you have to do much of the time. So feeding a fish to Jabu Jabu and hiding that hint behind a Zora and forcing you to explore in an adventure game for progression is really cool. I can't believe I just said that. All of this is to set up what I really like about Link's Awakening. The progression gating on Koholint can initially seem equally strange, but I'm generally okay with it because the amount of residents and information sources on Koholint is fairly small, just like Zora's domain. They make it apparent from the get-go that you need someone or something, like the Sleeping Walrus's thought bubbles depicting Marin, or the kid in town who tells you where Marin is when you need her. It's even more feasible because there's barely anyone in the town, and they're basically the only source of relevant information aside from maybe the animal village. As a result, story progression felt like a genuine puzzle in and of itself rather than a pace-breaking annoyance. This owl will tell you where you need to be headed in general terms, and Ulrira is liberally available to point you in the right direction with a few more specifics, but it's up to you to piece everything together. You're left to explore Koholint on your own. What it encourages, then, is that you play to the strengths of Zelda's similarities to the Metroidvania genre. At the end of the day, Zelda is about gathering items that give you new abilities and using those items to access previously blocked portions of said world. It's remarkably similar to Metroid in that regard. As such, one of the best things it could have done was make progression into a puzzle so that the linearity wouldn't feel as suffocating and it would still feel like an adventure across Koholint. Again, this only works so well for me because Koholint is about the size of a typical Metroidvania map, so exploring it with new items was just something I was gonna try anyway. Though I have changed my mind about Jabu Jabu, I still largely think that Ocarina of Time was a little too big for its own good, and that's how we ended up with weird misfires like Saria and Darunia. In this case, bigger isn't always better. This bleeds into the side quests as well. There are only 12 heart pieces, a trading sequence, a few upgrades, and only one central collectible in the secret seashells. The heart pieces are well hidden, as they are in any Zelda game. Maybe a little too well hidden sometimes. Nothing ever tells you that diving under the water in specific tiles will net you items and heart pieces, and some overworld walls are bombable, but your only indication would be to hold out your sword and meticulously tap each and every cave wall. I know I said that some meticulous searches are more welcome in Koholint because it's smaller, but this is a step too far. I really like this pseudo-dowsing mechanic within the dungeons, as it further adds to their often disorienting nature. The way forward is usually blocked behind a bombable wall, and within the confines of a small set of rooms, it's more reasonable to expect the player to douse for bombable walls. After obtaining the treasure map, you can spot which rooms you haven't entered, and if you see any suspicious lone rooms on said map, it's almost always a safe bet that there's a bombable wall in the way. In the overworld, however, there's no map to make sure. In a search area so large, the player needs some sort of hint that the possibility of a bombable wall exists. This is sometimes the case, like with this piece of heart hidden behind a bombable wall telegraphed by a lone tile of land surrounded by water. It sticks out in your mind, gets you thinking, and that's just enough of a push to get you dowsing to make sure. However, in Yarna Desert, there's a cave that has no such telegraph. There's just some bombable wall after you fall through the quicksand. This area is intended to be a consequence for failing during the Desert Land Mola fight, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that's all it was. There's absolutely nothing indicating a bombable wall except for your dowsing tool. Unless you spend the entire game tapping every wall, you'll likely miss it, but in that case you're probably not having very much fun. There are creative ways to telegraph these walls without ruining the surprise. In at least a few of these dungeons, there are tiles in the shape of an arrow pointing toward a bombable wall, and in both of these cases I actually missed that seemingly obvious clue the first time around. They're just tiles, after all, same as anywhere else in the dungeon, so looking too closely at them isn't much of a priority until you're stuck, and then you'll reach that revelation. Then there's a puzzle that involves pushing some blocks to match the eye holes of a skeleton drawing one room over, and you have to piece it together yourself. None of these quite reached Yarna Desert, unfortunately, but I think we can consider it a bad apple. Additionally, I enjoy that the heart pieces cap out at 12. While I don't think having more is a problem inherently, it is a little more tedious to track down every single one when there are 45 of them to look for. It's occasionally overwhelming, and some of the heart piece locations end up feeling underwhelming as a result. In this game, I can remember where I got most of them because there are only 12. It gives you the same sense of progression and escalating power, just not as massive a jump as other Zeldas, since your final heart count is lower than most Zeldas anyway. I'm willing to bet that the low heart count is the reason I died a lot this time around. Either that, or 2D Zelda is just more brutal than average. It was refreshing, I'm not complaining about it, but I've never struggled with a 3D Zelda to this degree before. The rest of the side quests aren't nearly as hard to figure out. The trade sequence is bearable because, say it with me, Koholint is a lot smaller, and there aren't as many people to talk to. Some characters will even outright tell you what they want or who you should give something to, expediting the process even more. I do sort of question the magnifying glass reward though. You get the boomerang, which is extremely powerful and well worth the quest, but they also locked the solution to the windfish puzzle behind this trade sequence, and that seems a little odd. The game essentially forces you to do the trade sequence, in effect forcing you to find a really broken item just so you can finish the game. It's less of a side quest and more of a background necessity, leaving only the secret seashells as your last collectible, hiding under tiles you can dig up with a shovel or thrown around grass tiles and inside trees. Since you only need 20 out of the 26 and the reward is a powered up sword that can sort of break the game if you've also completed the color dungeon, I can excuse the seashells being hidden in sometimes obscure locations. You might argue that this leaves Link's Awakening with less content to explore, but I don't think that's the right way to look at it. The focus this time around is almost exclusively about finding the path forward at all costs, in the overworld and in the dungeons. A lot of your playtime will be devoted to that goal, especially in those dungeons, which in this installment are fairly unforgiving, and I love that. See, as someone whose Zelda experience basically amounts to the 3D titles, it feels like reverse whiplash to play Link's Awakening, a game that is so unabashedly non-linear in its dungeon design that it hurts. To give a quick recap, some of my favorite dungeons in the series are the ones where progression is disorienting. I like feeling lost and trying to feel my way out of a bad situation. As such, I love the Water Temple, the Great Bay Temple, and pretty much every dungeon that everyone else hates. Every single dungeon on offer here fits that desire, and they all follow a similar structure. If you want an in-depth breakdown of that thematic identity based around keys and locks, well, let's be real, you already watched Boss Keys. Basically, the biggest distinction with 2D Zelda in comparison to 3D Zelda are that the dungeons allow you a lot more freedom. Often there will be small keys to collect and various different keyholes to take them to. In some cases, like Key Cavern, it's the concept the dungeon centers itself around. It's still pretty much the same as 3D Zelda everywhere else though. You find a dungeon item somewhere along the way, and that item gives you access to the rest of the inaccessible areas. You find the Nightmare Key to unlock the boss door, bada bing, bada boom. From Tail Cave to Turtle Rock, there's a steady increase in complexity, but the cool part is that the starting line is already higher than average. Tail Cave will introduce you to many of the staples you'll see later on, such as the compass playing a chime when you're in a room with a potential small key, and that each room will have a puzzle associated with it to drop said small key or to open closed doors. Sometimes that puzzle will be as simple as defeating all the enemies, but other times you'll have to think outside the box. The room at the northernmost portion of the map has a door that won't open until you push this block to the right, and you'll only get that hint after you can talk to owl statues, and you can only talk to owl statues after you get the beak located at the eastern portion of the map. Essentially, even when you're on the right path, the dungeons like to force you off of it and thus lead to more opportunities where you'll get confused. Not so much in this first dungeon, as it's fairly small and simple to navigate, but once you start getting to the dungeons with dozens of rooms, each accessed using a meticulous route, things get more complicated. Your dungeon item here is the Roc's Feather, allowing Link the ability to jump. You can use it to jump over the gaps in the floor, but more interestingly, you can use it in these 2D platforming sections that have Mario enemies in them. It's bizarre, I know, but it does lend Link's Awakening a uniqueness that it otherwise might not have. You can use that feather to access the Nightmare Key hidden behind gaps in the floor, then you fight Moldorm, and you're done. Let's skip to Angler's Tunnel. Same idea, but ratcheted up. Not only do you have the Roc's Feather, you have bombs, you have the Pegasus boots, and you have the Power Bracelet. And in Link's Awakening, every item you have is useful in some way. In a few cases, you can even combine their effects. By using the Pegasus boots to build up speed, your Roc's Feather will jump even further than it otherwise would, allowing you to cross large gaps. This is a required skill in Angler's Tunnel and in the Key Cavern before it. Traditional Zelda wisdom wouldn't train you to do something like this, much less require it, yet here we are. Angler's Tunnel uses the same philosophy as Tail Cave. It hides several keys and you've got to figure out which locks to open so you can hopefully find the dungeon item and fight the boss. Except this time, there are more rooms, the routes aren't as simple, and the keys are harder to find. The two you initially need are in the easternmost room, one at the very top and one hidden behind a block-pushing puzzle that you need a bomb to access. This allows you to open the two locks at the southeast portion of the map, thus allowing you to access the northern portion that you could only glimpse previously. So, from the start of the dungeon, you have to travel through the middle to the east and then back through that path to the beginning, traveling east and into the same room just so you can finally travel northward. Even then, you need 3 keys to complete this process. The last one is hidden south of the room near the beginning. You've got to do all this while you pass up chests that you can't access, get glimpses of areas that you'll need to keep in mind for the future, and make a mental note of any obstructions that a dungeon item could potentially bypass. Because once you get the flippers, you've then got to think about where you can actually use them. You can open this door with a switch, but behind it is a lock that you don't have the key for. You've got to think back to earlier in the dungeon when a small key fell into one of the holes. If you enter the 2D section near here, you'll see that it fell into some water, but you can't swim. Once you have the flippers, you can easily access this key, but you have to remember where the key was in the first place, something that's a lot harder to do when the area is obscured from view. Turtle Rock is the logical extreme of this progression. The largest and most open-ended dungeon in the game, it utilizes player confusion in the best way possible. At the start, you'll first have to figure out how to damage this Vyre, and oddly enough, he's damaged by magic powder. Yeah, remember the magic powder you got at the beginning of the game? You use it throughout the adventure to make fires and damage enemies and bosses. When I said every item is useful, I wasn't kidding. Here we are at the final dungeon, and the magic powder is a linchpin to progression. Once you defeat it, this beginning room already has 3 different options available. and they don't all lead to an immediate dead end like they usually do. No, they all branch off into their own areas with their own enemies and items, and that branching nature is exactly why it's so confusing. You've got to test them all out, remember which paths have which things in them, and come back when you can finally access them. You get this really satisfying feeling near the end, when there are only a few paths left and you know exactly where to go after toiling around for hours trying to get to that point in the first place. Or maybe that's just me. I'm not interested in discussing each dungeon individually, mostly because they all follow this pattern and I'd be saying the same thing over and over, plus Boss Keys did it better. But I would like to discuss the 2 dungeons that break away the most from this pattern, one for the better and one for the worst. First up, I guess we'll get this one out of the way. The color dungeon is an afterthought meant to give the director's cut more content, and it shows. The puzzles are almost entirely contained within the rooms themselves, and the progression structure reminds me of the Gibdo Cave. You go into a room, solve a puzzle, and then go into another room. None of those puzzles are terribly difficult to figure out. You can damage an enemy and turn them into a ball, and the puzzle is that you throw them into the correct sockets. You do this twice, by the way. There are a few instances of these switch puzzles where it will change the colors around it. I don't know what these are called, but you've played one before, I guarantee it. They're in default configurations that are so easy to solve from the beginning, so I never spent more than a few seconds on them. Other than that, there are some mini-bosses, and the final boss that consists of you hitting it really fast, I'm not even kidding, and you're done. Really, it's more for the offense and defense reward than it is for a fulfilling dungeon experience. Eagle's Tower is the other break from that pattern, but this time it's a refreshing break. The central gimmick revolves around the stone pillars that you need to break using a ball that you transport throughout the dungeon. There are 2 primary floors you walk through to make this happen, and it dials the meticulous pathway mantra up to 11. Gotta factor in that there are switches to block off and open certain pathways, that you can fall from the 2nd floor onto the 1st floor using some of the pitfall tiles, that you need to find ways to get both the ball and Link to the same place using different methods. The dungeon lets you go about smashing the pillars in any order you want, and that makes it even more confusing at certain points. Trying to figure out how to smash that last pillar took a very long time since each of the pathways intersect. However, not all of them have equal amounts of exits, so you have to enter from other areas, activate the switch, which enables you to go through a different pathway that leads to the same endpoint. It's pretty wild. I don't envy the child who had to contend with something this complex. I struggled with a lot of 3D Zelda dungeons as a kid. I can't imagine trying to do something like this with my pea brain. I'm a little dumbfounded that every dungeon manages to be this good. They don't go on too long, they're all sufficiently challenging from the perspective of a newcomer, and they all play with items and concepts that are refreshing for the series. I particularly enjoy the focus on upgrading existing items. There's a tendency in Zelda to create dungeon items by throwing ideas at the wall and hoping they stick. I usually look to items like the spinner or the ball and chain. They aren't used much outside of their dungeon, and they tend to take up space in Link's inventory. Not that there's limited inventory in Zelda games, you know what I mean, they're unnecessary. Link's Awakening decides, hey, we only really need a core set of items, the ability to run, jump, block, pick up, create fire, and hookshot. So in a place like the Face Shrine, for instance, the dungeon item is an upgrade to the Power Bracelet, allowing Link to pick up heavier objects than rocks and pots. In Eagle's Tower, you get the Mirror Shield, replacing your regular shield, and in Turtle Rock, you get the Magic Rod, which lets you shoot fire long distances. This isn't new for some Zelda games. The Mirror Shield has been done before, and that also replaces your shield. Same with the Hookshot and the Long Shot. I find it notable in Link's Awakening more so since it feels unusually restrained and focused on only a few items that you'll use all the time, as opposed to having something like the Dominion Rod. I feel like I'm exclusively picking on one of my favorite Zeldas. This is a small thing, but I love how you need to open the dungeon beforehand with a key, or in one case, a chain chomp named Bow Wow. As soon as you see a keyhole, you know that this place will be important sometime later, and once you get the correct key, you can come back like a giddy schoolgirl and access it from the outside. But then it's up to you to find a way to access that dungeon. In the case of the Angler's Tunnel, you unlock it from the ridge above, and then must make your way to the entrance another way. This doesn't happen every time, some dungeons are pretty straightforward. I just like that you literally unlock some of them. It's cute. I guess if I had to devise a complaint of some kind, I would point to the boss fights. The mini-bosses don't bother me much because they're kinda supposed to be simple, but many of the nightmares were jokes. Oddly enough, the easiest dungeon in the game, Tail Cave, starts out with one of the hardest bosses. You just need to hit Moldorm from the back 3 times to win, but the room is very small, it's hard to jump over him with the right trajectory without him snapping back into you, and it's especially hard to avoid dying or getting shoved into the pit below. You're only going to have 3 hearts at this point, and he does a full hit of damage each time. Additionally, when you fall into the pit, you don't recover hearts, but he does. So as soon as you get back to the arena, you're back to square one, except you have less health. I remember being taken aback when I got here for the first time, but eventually I got through it and thought, well hey, maybe this is a good sign for the bosses to come. It is followed up by a genie, one that repeats the same text over and over, has a simple attack pattern, and yeah, he's easy. Maybe you'll die to his last phase, but you're more likely to die from boredom when you're dodging his initial fireballs. Then you fight Slime Eyes, a boss that is moderately challenging, I guess, but as long as you're jumping at the right time and using the Pegasus boots effectively, it shouldn't give you much trouble at all. Then you're hit with a triple whammy: Anglerfish, Slime Eel, and Facade. All 3 of them are laughable. I got to the Anglerfish and killed him before he could even attack or do anything. I still don't even really know what he's supposed to do. Slime Eel has an interesting gimmick with the hook shot, and ordinarily the spike ball rotating around the middle would be threatening, except it can't touch you when you're in any of the 4 corners. So it just becomes wait for the head to come out and hook shot it. Otherwise you kind of just sit there and do nothing. Facade is hilarious, you just drop bombs onto his face. I'm not joking, that's all you could do. Even mustering that complaint, though, the rest of the bosses are pretty good. Evil Eagle inherits the regenerating health of Moldorm when you fall off the tower, and has some genuinely hard to predict moves. The final boss has several phases that each have specific weaknesses you need to figure out and exploit, the first of which uses the magic powder. Again, still useful somehow. So when I complain about the bosses here, it's more of a nitpick than anything else. Just a shame that some of these dungeons couldn't have been bookended by better challenges. I mean, it's really the only complaint I have with the dungeons. You'd think they wouldn't feel memorable thanks to the Game Boy's limited visual prowess, but it still manages to look distinct, especially on the Game Boy Color. I don't know if this is just me, but I kinda like how the Game Boy Color uses solid, defining color choices in its sprites. It helps them to pop out at you and stick in your mind. Each dungeon is set in a neat location with a visually stimulating and fitting color palette. The inside of Eagle's Tower uses gray for the stone walls and green for the floor tiles, making it feel like the inside of a tower. Whereas Catfish's Maw is murkier, seeing as it's underwater, so the tiles are a muted yellow with darker red walls. This way, every dungeon is visually distinct because they each have different color palettes and tile sets. It's just another way to build that mental image within your mind and to keep it contained within each dungeon instead of letting those thoughts bleed into one another. I would imagine this was harder in the original release, and I guess that's just another reason why the color is so important. Surprisingly enough, the soundtrack is equally important. I'm not sure if I'm biased or ignorant or whatever, but I genuinely didn't expect to love the soundtrack as much as I do. I don't really listen to 8-bit music, and I always kinda regarded the Game Boy sound chip as technically inferior, and maybe that rotted my brain a little bit. I love the rendition of the main overworld theme. It feels peppier and more befitting of a pleasant dream. I also love how you don't get to hear it until you find your sword, and that there's an entire music track devoted to playing while you find said sword. The Face Shrine even has a great track. I was surprised since the series' dungeon music is usually only there for ambience and atmosphere, but in this case I actually think I'd listen to it on my own time if the loop wasn't so short. I'd recommend the video by 8-Bit Music Theory on Link's Awakening. It does a far better job than me explaining why the soundtrack works very well. All in all, the tone of this video is surprise. I've gotta be honest, going into Link's Awakening, I did not expect to like it very much. I wasn't familiar with 2D Zelda. I was afraid that it would feel too limiting, or that the smaller screen space would be an issue, or that I wouldn't like the music, or that it would have some huge flaw that everyone liked to ignore. Link's Awakening offered none of that, and is a genuinely brilliant little Game Boy game. Sure, sometimes I'll get fed up by the limited map or the constant pausing to switch items, but I got over that stuff very quickly. It doesn't go on for too long, it says and does exactly what it needs to do in the short time it has, and best of all, I don't feel like at any point I was wasting my time. Honestly, I find this game more enjoyable to play than the likes of Wind Waker, Ocarina of Time, even Skyward Sword, and that certainly came out of left field. It's just so tightly paced. Yeah, that's the right word for it. It has a pacing that is never obstructed for too long. You find a new item, talk to an NPC, do something in the overworld, watch a cutscene, whatever, and then you move on to the next dungeon, and you keep doing this while you build up to the inevitable, bittersweet conclusion. No wasted time, no intense frustration, no growing boredom, just a joyous, contained adventure on the island of Koholint. Like a dream, it comes and goes, but the memory of that adventure will never be forgotten. Allow me to thank a few select patrons: Dominic Gendron Langla, Lucas Waldeck, Dan Russell, Lord Arceus, Vitros, Nicholas Ammond, Chuck Harkins, B. Shimon, my own father, Purist Bordeaux, Duke091, and Christopher Knoll. Of course, if you liked anything that you saw here, feel free to comment down below and discuss it. Part of the reason I still do this is because I like discussing with everybody in my audience. It's fun. And please don't find some obscure thing that I got wrong, because I don't want another Ocarina of Time on my hands. Just be civil, please. My name has been King K, and I hope you have some well-deserved fun today.